Hey guys, in today's video, we're going to talk about how to perfect your takeaway in detail. All right guys, Eric here at the Bethlehem Golf Club. I want to talk to you today about how to perfect your takeaway in detail. We're going to talk about where you should be in that takeaway position in detail in terms of all of your body segments, and then I'm going to give you 2 or 3 drills at the end to go over those. Now, before we dive into that, what I want to talk to you today about is CogornoGolf.com, our membership site, our online community. If you guys can't come here and travel to Bethlehem, Pennsylvania to hang out with us, we still want to help you get better at golf, and I want to personally coach you, and that's what we can do through CogornoGolf.com. Now, at the membership site, you get access to all of our premium content. That includes all of our master classes, that includes our member library, our practice section, our quick fix sections on the site, and most importantly, our Facebook group, where you can post up your videos and I can give you personalized feedback to help take your game to the next level. We'll include the link in the description down below for CogornoGolf.com. Would love for you guys to check that out. Now, in terms of the takeaway and perfecting our takeaway, this first part of this video is going to be very much in detail. Okay, I got a lot of feedback from you guys that you guys want detail about parts of the swing, and that's what we're going to get. Now, at the end, we'll kind of simplify some of that and go over things in terms of drills for you guys to do, feels to take with you. But what I want to talk about is the detail of the takeaway. So let's dive right into it. Now, if I take my normal setup position, and the details we're going to talk about when I say takeaway is going to be from the setup position to the point where the club is first parallel to the ground. So to me, that's kind of the takeaway phase, right? From position number 1 or at our setup position into this first parallel. What happens? What specifically should happen from here to here? This takeaway portion of your swing, when things go off, oftentimes can cause problems later on. So it is a really important part of our swing that we kind of get down, that we get there in that right position. So hence the detail that's coming here. So let's go through this. How we're going to approach this is start from the ground up. I'm going to talk about each body segment and how they move and change and how you get from that setup position perfectly to that takeaway position first parallel. Okay, so let's get started with how we get to that first position. And like I said, we're going to start from the ground up. So let's talk about the feet. Now, the feet at address in terms of where the pressure are, left versus right, are going to be roughly 50-50. And so when we take our setup position, if we're 50-50, by the time we go from setup to first parallel, there will be a little bit of pressure shift into the right foot. Not a ton, but there will be a little bit of shift. Now, I'm not going to have a huge body mass, or I'm not moving the mass of my body a ton to the right as I do that, but there will be a slight pressure shift into my right foot as we start. We're talking about kind of a couple degrees, maybe going from 50-50 to kind of 55-45. So a slight pressure shift. The other part of my feet is where the pressure is in terms of the middle of my foot, my toes, or my heels. And when I start with my normal setup position, I want the pressure in your feet to be in the middle or slightly towards the balls of your feet, kind of where your shoelaces meet your toes. When I do my little takeaway position, does it stay there or does it move? Well, if I'm on the balls of my feet when I start, as I'm working back into my takeaway position, there will be a slight change in the pressure of my feet. I'll be going from the balls of my feet. The pressure will move slightly towards my left toes as I work back, and the pressure in my right foot will work slightly towards my right foot. Again, really small portion of this thing. We're not talking about dramatic changes here, but that would be the direction that I move in. I'll go from 50-50 to just slightly more on my right foot when I first start, and I'll go from balls of my feet to slightly more on my left toes and slightly more towards the middle of my right foot. So that's the detail involved with how the feet change during the takeaway phase. Okay, so let's talk about how the legs work. Now, how the legs work, if I take my normal address position, really there's 2 functions of the legs during the takeaway in the backswing, and that is that they can change flex, so I can bend them or straighten them, and then they can rotate internally or externally. Those are kind of the 2 if you watch some of our videos we're talking about. So what happens during the takeaway? Well, again, not a ton of action here, but if I start with my knees bent over kind of the balls of my feet or the edges of my shoelaces, when I go from setup to takeaway position, there will be a slight change in my knee flex. That is, my left knee is going to gain flex forward and my right knee is going to be starting to straighten. How much? Just a couple of degrees. Again, we're not talking about drastic movements during the takeaway. So I'm going to go from normal knees kind of even with each other over the edge of my shoelace line to the point where my left knee will bend slightly forward and my right knee will start to work slightly back as I'm straightening my leg. Now, in terms of internal, external, the only thing going on here is that my left knee is going to rotate slightly internally as I work back. My right knee, or my left knee is going to work in, my right knee is going to turn a little bit as I go back. Kind of think about that as going from 12 o'clock to about 1 o'clock with my right kneecap. So I'll go normal setup, left knee works slightly in, right knee works slightly out. That's how the legs work from setup into the transition to takeaway phase. Okay, next up the chain here is how the hips work. We're gonna keep this one short and sweet in that the hips do turn right away when I'm doing my takeaway. When I start my swing, let's assume I have 0 degrees of turn, just means I'm square to the target. When I do my takeaway, I don't still have 0 degrees of turn. As a really rough stock model, we'll say that the hips turn about 15 degrees. What is 15 degrees? Here's my setup position. By the time I get to my takeaway, here's about 15 degrees. When I go from there, you know, the idea of the hips during the backswing is to go from 0 to 45. So 0 degrees to start, and then I'm getting to 45 by the top of my swing, and I'm kind of doing that gradually, cut it up into thirds. I go 15 degrees to here, another 15 degrees, another 15 degrees. So very little hip turn in the beginning. We're not trying to keep our hips locked straight. There will be about 15 degrees of hip turn. My belt buckle works from about 12 o'clock again to that about 1 o'clock position. That's really all you need to worry about with the hips. As I talked about before, the legs will be changing flex. My left leg does increase a little bit of flex, right? And my right leg does lose a little flex. So there will also be a little tilt to my pelvis. So the left side of my hip will begin going a little bit lower than the right side of my hip, but 15 degrees of hip turn is all we're looking for. Okay, next up the line is kind of going to be the chest and the shoulders, and same sort of thing as the hips in that there will be some turn. When we do our takeaway position, if we start again with 0 degrees of rotation, by the time we get to our first parallel position, I'm looking for about 15 or 30 degrees rather. I'm looking for about 30 degrees of shoulder turn. So I had 15 with my hips, I have 30 with my shoulders. What does that mean? That means that my chest and my shoulders have turned about twice as much during this little takeaway phase as my hips have, right? So here's my normal setup, get to first parallel. So my shoulders have turned about 30 degrees. Same sort of idea as the hips. In general, we're kind of cutting that 90-degree shoulder turn that I'm looking for in an entire backswing into thirds. So I go about 30 degrees to here, 60 to here, about 90 to the top. So about 30 degrees of shoulder turn from here. Again, my shirt button's going from that 12 to maybe 1 or 2 o'clock position when I get to my takeaway phase. So the next part is going to be what happens with my arms, hands, and club. And when we hit this first kind of parallel position, we have those body angles we talked about. Where should that club actually be? Well, if I get into my first parallel position, so first parallel being the club is parallel to the ground for the first time, right, during the swing. And so when I get here, what's going on? Well, from the face-on position, really the main thing we're looking at there is going to be where the butt of the club is. And I would say from the face-on position, in terms of this line, the butt of the club, is going to be about on the outside of the right thigh. So the butt of the club is not going to be middle of the leg, it's not going to be inside, it's going to be about on the right side of your thigh. This would be about a neutral takeaway position. If you're someone during this phase who hinges really early, you'll be more inside. So if I just go here and I just hinge, you see the butt of the club doesn't move at all. It's still more middle of my body. So there needs to be some motion to get to here. So if you hinge too early, you'll be inside of your right leg. If you're someone that doesn't hinge at all or hinges really late, you would be drastically outside of your leg by the time you get to first parallel. A normal amount of how much should I hinge would put me in a position where the butt of the club is outside of my right thigh at first parallel. I'm going to say that again in case you missed it. How much should I hinge? The answer is whatever you need to feel to the point where you actually get the butt of the club outside of right thigh by first parallel. So from face on, that's really the one key checkpoint we're looking at. Let's talk about the down the line parts. Okay, so down the line parts for the takeaway and the club. The goal here is simple. I'm trying to get the club head directly even with my hands when it gets first parallel. I don't want it outside, I don't want it inside. Now, Do we need to be perfectly on this spot to play good golf? Absolutely not. You could be more outside or inside. I'd like you to be perfect. If I had a choice, if you weren't directly on this hand line, I'd prefer slightly more outside. So club heads even with the hands by the time it's first parallel. That's the point that should answer a lot of questions I get all the time. Eric, how much should I hinge? You should hinge to the point where the club head's even with your hands at first parallel and the butt of the club's outside your thigh. That's it. Eric, how much should I rotate my forearms? You should rotate your forearms to the point where the club head's even with your hands at first parallel. You get the point here? So you want to hit this spot in space and adjust your feels relative to that. Club head in line with the hands is the first checkpoint we look for. The second point is, where is the club face? And so if this is straight toe up, we'd like the club face to be tilted down. As a rough guideline, you want to have the leading edge. You kind of drew a line down the leading edge of the club and a line up your back line or your spine in space. That should be about the same, right? So if this is here, the angle that my back is at and the angle of the club should be pretty close to each other. That means this club should be tilted down somewhere, ranges from about 10 up to about 30 degrees would be about normal. So those are the key checkpoints you're looking for with the club at that takeaway first parallel position. Okay, so that's in detail, right, where all of the body segment should be. Now, keep in mind, the point of this video is just to give you a stock sort of position and a stock model to follow. Of course, I know there are a lot of great players who don't hit every one of these positions perfect, and you don't need to either. But if you're off and you want to fix your takeaway or fix something that it causes later on, you use these as models. Now, how you do that when you practice is you need to give yourself feedback in terms of this or hitting a position or checkpoint in space. You're looking for video feedback, right? That's where the live view comes into play. You need to be seeing yourself. You don't judge your takeaway on feels, you judge it by where it's at. It's the point of all these mechanics. Now, having said that, those positions, how one person might get there could be completely different how someone else gets there. The biggest variable, right, in terms of the body motions, those are pretty stock normal. Like, there's not anything you're gonna do that I'm gonna say the feet, the knees, the turn should be all that different. There are some caveats though in terms of your grip and kind of how much you turn your body and how early you turn it. The piece that I want taken home here in terms of grip is how you get to this first parallel position. Now, I said I want the toe to be slightly tilted down about the same angle as your back line. What you need to understand is this. If you grip the club weaker, which would be your V's over kind of by your chin or left of your chin, to get the club face tilted down, you have to curl your wrists under more. That means flex or bow your left wrist, back of the left hand towards the ground. That means extend your right wrist, right palm down towards the ground. If you have a stronger grip where the V's are more to the right of your right collarbone or shoulder, to get the face tilted down, you don't need to do that at all. In fact, you could have a little bit of cup here in your left wrist and your right wrist will be kind of more flat. So what you need to do to get to that checkpoint does depend on your grip. If you have a weaker grip, you need to curl under more. If you have a stronger grip, you can keep that a little bit cupped as you go back. That's really the only caveat that I would say in space. And then in terms of your body motions, if you turn too much or too little, you're gonna just kind of get some natural results of that. And what I mean by that, right, from the down the line part in particular, if I turn my body a lot early, what happens is, generally speaking, my arms and hands are gonna work in a lot early. If I don't turn my body at all, I have very little turn, my arms and hands are gonna work down the line or out too far, okay? If you have a lot of body turn, your arms and hands are gonna work in more. If you have very little body turn, you're gonna work down the line more. So when we get to that first parallel position again, and I get the club about here, you'll notice, right, to get the club in space, kind of over my toe line, which is where I want the shaft over my toe line here. For me to do that with a neutral amount of turn, if I get that all right, I have just a soft amount of fold with my right arm, just a little bit of bend. Let's call that about 30 degrees, okay? So if my arm was perfectly straight, 180 degrees, how much do I bend my arm by the time I get to this first parallel? The answer is about 30 degrees, right? A little bit of bend. Now, if you watch your takeaway and you have a lot of arm bend, almost always that happens from a lack of turn. Think about it this way. If I make a takeaway and I don't turn my body at all, and I said I'm going to go more out, I would bend my right arm to get the club right back on plane, right? So if you see a lot of arm bend, more than likely you haven't turned enough, and that's your kind of making up for it. If you see a nice takeaway where the elbows stay closer together, which is what your goal should be, you want your elbows closer together, you need to be able to turn a little bit to do that. So now that we have those stock things, you got a couple little things to look at. Let's talk about 1 or 2 or 3 drills you can start with to kind of see where your takeaway position's at and correct it if it's off. Okay, so a couple drills to put this together. Now, if you search on here, we've done several takeaway videos that talk about the specifics a little more in depth and troubleshooting the takeaway. So you can check some of those videos out. I just want to give you a couple of the main ones based on what we talked about. Now, in terms of your body motions, we talked a lot about what your body checkpoints are in space. There's one really good thing to do to ensure that you have enough body turn during that initial takeaway phase to first parallel, and that is to put an object between your arms. When you put an object between your arms, more or less what that does is it forces you to have to turn your body. You'll feel your core, your chest, your shoulders turning. There's 2 things I like to do to drill that in. One would be a Tour Striker Smart Ball from Martin Chuck. We like that a lot. This is an object you'd put just underneath your elbows. And when I do my takeaway, for me to get to that position where I want to have the club down my toe line parallel to the ground, I have to turn my core, I have to turn my lower body and my chest and shoulders to get there. And this is a really easy one you can start to even hit some little shots with. So ball between your arms would be an excellent one. If you don't have that, you can also do a range bucket. Okay, a range bucket you can do 2-fold. You can put this on your chest like we did our whip drill and keep it together with your biceps and hold a club like this, and this will do the same thing. So for me to get to my takeaway position, this forces me to have to turn my chest as I work in. So an object like this, or even a bucket between your arms that you have to put in, squeeze with your arms and do the same takeaway position, can work with that as well. And then if you're someone who, let's say your body turns good, but you either have too much forearm rotation or don't have enough hinge, right? So those 2 things make you turn your body correctly, but they don't make you get the club perfectly in the right spot. If you have not enough hinge or too much forearm rotation, what I would recommend starting with is an alignment rod or driveway marker down the left side of the club. It's gonna feel weird when you take your grip on it. The club is on the rod is on the left side of your hip. When you work down during your takeaway, you wanna ride that down your thigh to keep the club in front of you. If you don't hinge enough, it won't ride down your thigh at all. It'll stay on your hip. If you don't hinge enough, it should go like this, okay? And then if you roll too much, the club will come off your side. So it gives you instant feedback on both of those. If you roll, you're gonna wanna feel like the stick stays on your side as you start turning and you're hinging it down your leg. And the same sort of thing, you can start to chip little shots with it. So those are 2 feedback drills. Again, guys, when you guys are doing the takeaway pieces, by no means do you have to think about every single part of this. This is meant to serve as a guideline and a model for you to practice. Number 2 is, if you're gonna practice your takeaway, don't be foolish and waste time. Use video and use that by hitting these positions to guide your feels. Number 3, if you need to change either your body motion or the club in space, put an object between your arms to change your body motion, put a stick on the side of the club to change your takeaway. And last note is, don't get lost in the takeaway. The takeaway just needs to be functional to serve the rest of your swing. If you guys are having a hard time figuring out whether you need to change it or not, or how to fix it, check out CogornoGolf.com. We can definitely help you guys there. Hey guys, thanks for watching today's video. If you liked the video, do us a favor, click the like button down below. Click the notification bell. Also, please subscribe if you haven't. Another reminder, every Monday at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we are live here on YouTube for Rapid Fire Golf. We'd love to see you guys there.